There we go. Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to another After Hours animation event. Tonight's event is hosted by the wonderful Miranda Javid, called Having a Body While Animating. I'll give a little intro about our host and then I'll let her take it away from there. Miranda Javid is a 2D animator, curator, and art educator. Her animations describe topics like cognitive experience, human bias, and the relationship between individuals and their communities. These works have been shown nationally and internationally at festivals like the Ann Arbor Film Festival, Eyeworks Film Festival, Slamdance, the Flaherty Seminar, and Malt Adult. Currently, she lives in unceded Munsee territory, also known as the Hudson Valley in New York State. There we go, Miranda. We're so happy to have you here, and take it away.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Oh, okay. I was getting a little feedback.
Oh, sorry. I think you're muted. Do you mind unmuting? Sorry, I might have clicked the wrong name. There we go.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, cool. So first, I just want to say I am really excited to be here. This is a group I've been watching for a while now, and I feel like I'm really grateful to all that McKenna does, and just what a cool archive this has turned out to be. And I'm genuinely very psyched to be a part of it. I think the things that have been recorded as part of After Hours are going to be seen and useful to many people for years and years to come. So thanks for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And click slideshow. All right, so today's talk is called Having a Body While Animating. And it's not going to be a talk that's about ergonomics and chair heights and things that are really important, but it's not going to be that talk. It's going to be a little bit more about embodiment and at times burnout and ways that in just the past year, I've tried to bring my body back into this practice. I'm gonna take questions at the end, and hopefully we can have more of a facilitated conversation that is less spotlighting my experiences and more hearing from anyone who wants to share theirs. We'll talk more about that at the end of the talk. But I do want to kick us off just with a little bit of an exercise. This is optional, and of course, all bodies are different, but I would like to invite you to a quick guided kind of grounding so that we don't just spend this entire talk up in our brains. So join me wherever you are. You can stay in a chair, you can step back and stand. I'm going to guide you through just a little bit of sensory experience in the body. And feel free to make substitutions if some of the parts of the body I mentioned are not things that are available or accessible to you. So we're going to start by just putting some awareness into our feet. I'm going to begin with the left foot. And I invite you to wiggle your left big toe. If you can, wiggle your left big toe. And try and take note if there are any sensory experiences related to that left big toe. You can ask yourself, does it feel warm or cold? Try not to judge what it feels like, but just take note of it. Do you have your foot in a sock? Are you touching the ground? Can you feel gravity on your feet? And go ahead and repeat that on your right foot. Next, we're just going to journey through some of the other senses. The feet sort of grounded us in touch a moment ago, but I'd like to kind of orient towards some of the others. So you can either close your right eye or cover your right eye, but take a minute to look out of your left eyeball and see if you can just take note of the shapes you see. You can look at the colors, the quality of light, what does the left eye see? And then flip it and do the same with your right. No judgments, just qualities. Are you in a dark room? Are you in a bright room? Are you between spaces? Go ahead and wiggle your tongue around your mouth a little. This may seem a little silly, but move your tongue around your mouth. And ask yourself if there's anything you can taste in your mouth, maybe some fragments of dinner, maybe some lingering flavors from the day. Take an inhalation through your nose, essentially sniff. And this one can be harder not to assign judgment to, but what do you smell? Do you smell anything? And finally, I'm just gonna be silent for a moment or two as I invite you to listen to your surroundings. Okay, thanks for joining me in that. It felt important to try and do some somatic experience as we talk about our bodies. Hi, again, I'm Miranda Javid, and I like to draw, I like to animate. It's also really important to me to go outside. And if there's something I care about a lot and want to mention here, it's land stewardship. And yes, that ink is compostable in that picture. I have this definition of art making that I've been using for myself for years. And that definition is any act which calls attention to the act of consciousness. For me, in my work, I've tended to make work about kind of mental states. Sometimes that means about mental illness and sort of like grief cycles. So I made a film called Smoke's Last Thought, which is an anthropomorphized candle that's chemically transformed, permanently transformed into a wisp of smoke, and how that candle kind of clings in its smoke form to the past before kind of moving through that into a new zone. I made a manual cinema piece called Two Truths, which is about being in a foreign country and being surrounded with a language that I was less familiar with. It's a true story, and the ways that language changed my experience of drinking tea, which is something I'm always doing. And I made a film called The Wind, which for me is kind of like a reminder to myself to diverge from the plans, the more like dopaminergic ideas I have about what I'm headed towards in a piece, and just that reminder to get outside and kind of experience things. The film also has a lot of kind of the digital body versus the physical body, which is something that I don't like to put like a good or a bad valence on, which I think is important to mention in this talk because I'm going to be talking a lot about physical spaces, but I think a lot of what I'm going to say has digital relevance too. About 10 years ago, I was sort of animating, but I mostly considered myself just someone that drew, and I was making these giant, well, I thought they were pretty big. They're like, 4 feet by 8 or 9 feet scrolls, making landscapes with a tiny mechanical pencil. And I think I share this now in part because it probably shows you some of who I am, which is someone who loves or kind of gets attracted into repetitive action. In the long view of the things I've made in my life, I've tended to feel like something was finished or worthy at times if it took a lot of repetitive action or just a lot of energy. And I see how this translates into the animations I was making prior to this year. And I like what I make, but I do recognize that there's something in that work that will probably remain to some extent that is my my repetitive fixation. And I'm actually diagnosed OCD too. So I have a relationship to this stuff that is also kind of dovetailed with those kinds of fixations and, tics and things like that. I encounter a lot of animators that are OCD, which is something that I would just love to have more research on at some point, because I do feel the act of repetitively drawing the same image, like I can never quite tell if it's like activating the best parts of my kind of OCD self, or if it's like kind of the stuff I'm trying to feed less. But I'm trying now to kind of weave between those things. But basically, for years, I would say, I really want to be living a sort of different life in the studio. I want to be less tight and less obsessed with like completing each image to a ridiculous amount. I want to be able to let go at the end of a studio session and go hang out with people and leave things behind. And I mean this, like, this is something that I feel like people were giving me feedback at a certain point before this story starts that was like, yeah, you always say that. And I encounter this a lot in the animation community. So, feel free to share what you see in this. I don't want to prescribe anything, but I do think there's something of an animator story there. But this chapter kind of begins around a year ago, maybe 13, 14 months ago now. Of course, life since 2020 has shifted for all of us, and there's a lot that goes into that. At the end of 2021, I found myself newly relocated to Kingston, New York. It's in the same region my partner is from. And for the first time, the blocks of my life were kind of like shifting around enough that I could actually ask this question in a deeper way. How do I want to live? And, what am I going to do to prioritize my own happiness? And one of the big things that changed for me when I moved across the country, I was living in LA, I'd been working full time at Cal State LA for many years, was suddenly not being a professor in the same way I had been. And I still teach some things. I teach continuing ed at Parsons right now, and mostly just freelancing. But like previously, teacher was a big part of my identity. And it was actually something that I didn't necessarily wasn't trying to give up when I left Los Angeles. I think the other things in my life were kind of shifting. And I, for the first time, was realizing that I was kind of clinging to the idea of being a professor and what it meant. And it's a really, probably a long story, but it was a dramatic shift in my psyche and who I saw myself at the end of 2021 and the start of 2022. So I find myself kind of relocated in a different climate. Everything's changed. And I was really lucky I had unemployment for a little while. And I guess for a while I had just been wishing that I had more time to draw and make things. My first few years of the pandemic were pretty intense and very full of work and need. And I think that when that finally stopped, there was a part of me that expected to just suddenly feel creative and fine, but it turned out I had to work through some things. I don't think I've ever been as burnt out as I was at the end of 2021. And it's such a common thing to talk about. So everybody probably has some relationship to that word and experience, but I'll just say anecdotally, I thought I was cracking up. I thought I was having losing reality. And then within just a few weeks of my schedule changing, I found myself again. And it surprised me actually how real that experience was, even after conceiving of burnout a certain way. But so when I was sitting in this room, same room I'm in now, I struggled to know what to do. I would just kind of sit here. And what I came back to at a certain point was instinctive. It was just the touch of a mark on a page. I had acquired all these 2 by 3.5 foot pieces of kind of nice paper for free. And I just decided I was going to fill them up with these dots. And this is a 6-week interlude in here. And it was honestly I would call it borderline trippy. I was just in my dots. I don't and I think it was some kind of process I was working through to feel things again. And that mark on the page really grounded me. Not so much, in some ways that's just what this always is. For me as a 2D animator, someone that draws, that kind of feedback of my hand utensil and the page feels intrinsic to the process and reminded me that I was here. So yeah, and it was every now and then this happens to me because, like I said, I'm that type of person, but it was like I would just go into a world. And I don't think I've actually ever experienced that in work before. I think there was something, and I don't know what any Paleolithic human experienced, but like all over the world, from like Argentina to France, there's like these kind of images of hands that come up in Paleolithic caves, or caves where Paleolithic humans are. And I felt something like that. And they're like, I was just being like, I was here, I was here, I was here, like some kind of signature. So that was a crucial, yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to reconnect your mic or AirPods? We're just sometimes getting a little bit of feedback. So sorry.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can. I'll let you know. It continue. So sorry.
No problem. Okay, well, this is where I feel like it really starts to connect. So I'm in my room just drawing dots and like very, lucky to have a few weeks off. And I finally pick up this book that for like 10 years, I think people had told me would change my life. It's not like the newest book, and we can talk about the kind of therapeutic relevance of this, but I read this book, which is about basically how in our Western society, there aren't so many tools to feel what's going on in our bodies, and that there's like kind of a long legacy of splitting the mind and body in Western consciousness. And this book is particularly about the ways that when stuff gets hard, without tools to kind of connect the mind and body, the body sometimes like records traces of that the mind doesn't even feel. And why this was interesting to me was because I just had like a weird somatic experience where I was reading it, and all of a sudden I like felt this kind of tension that I'm always doing, or sometimes doing, where just like the central column of my body, I was holding unnecessary stress. And I had never really noticed that before. The other cool thing was that, at the end of the book, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote it, has basically describes becoming a yoga practitioner and instructor, because his like kind of advice on how to reconnect the mind and body is essentially setting yourself up for states of tension, like physical tension, and then practicing kind of relaxing into them. And he mentions Tai Chi at the end of the book, which is something I, at this point, had been doing for about 3 years, and I'm still doing a lot of. So I kind of had this framework to basically like test out body stress and practice using it less. I'm still at the infancy of my Tai Chi practice. Now it's been like almost 4 years, but to me, it's like about kind of like human ergonomics, or, if anyone's familiar with Alexander technique, there's a lot it has in common with that. So here's a little poem that gets to the heart of like what I was thinking about and hoping to aim for in my art practice. But, real life sets in, and I had to find work. So this is funny because I thought I was going to get a full-time job at a nonprofit, and I actually got some offers and ended up with like a really cool job offer at a place I like in town, and like fully negotiated the salary and the time off and everything. And I had this experience of getting the email back where all that was left to do was basically just to say yes. And I recognized that my body was like, no, we're not doing that. And it took a whole weekend to catch up to that. But I think now back to that, and I'm like, if that ever happens again, I just know from the start, like, to trust it. Like I wasn't, there's nothing wrong with getting a full-time job as a nonprofit either. That would have been cool, but it wasn't really my path. And I was all mixed up in it. And then fortuitously, I got this freelance job. Because I'd been teaching, I hadn't been like seriously freelancing for years. And it came right at the right moment. And this is like a little clip of it. It's going to come out next month finally. But I was sitting, at my digital tablet in this room drawing and animating a lot. And I realized, number one, I still liked animating, which was cool because honestly, for a lot of the years since the pandemic started, I was not sure of that. But I also recognized that something was lost in translation from my dots to this. And you can see me kind of working it out in just this short clip. I'm like trying to reduce the lines, keep things simpler. But I started to say, like, okay, what would I have to do to make this really fun for me? And this actually was a pretty fun project, but I just mean, like, I started asking the question of like what I was needing out of this practice that had been missing so far. Okay, and this is where I mention something that I hope is a theme and that we come back to throughout this talk, which is like, I'm not a physical therapist, I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways that for me personally, I used my body as kind of like the site of investigation for this practice and for a new film, actually. But I can't say for certain that anything I'm going to share is right for you. If anything, I'm just trying to encourage like a curiosity about the body, but I am going to get specific. So I came to this idea that if I could just use a brush and ink, that I would be able to sort of like relax into the form in a way that at the time my tablet was feeling like it was pulling me away from. And what I'm about to talk about is like basically my personal artwork, not my like freelancer self. So, it has different questions and needs that allow me to basically do whatever. So I got back into using paper and kind of, I didn't develop this framework. This is actually from my partner's drumming textbook that's called Inner Drumming. It's like one of these like Tai Chi and drummer crossovers. So I'm trying to be like, I don't know, it's not mine, but in that drumming book, he says like the way that he practices being embodied while drumming, for me, animating, is staying loose, staying connected, and scanning, which we're not talking about flatbed scanning. We're talking about something, related to what we did in the beginning of this talk. So just like checking in with different parts and having a framework to do so. And here's a time lapse of the way I'm working. So just brushing the ink on the tracing paper, and the registration is from just like a pad of paper, so just like the binding, but I use a lot of binder clips too when I have to kind of play around with that. I think that shifting into using ink, which isn't something that was entirely new to me, but like you can see from my graphite work, there is a sort of like oppositional quality to it for me, where it was loose and it's messy, and you kind of have to like go with the flow on it, which I just find, at least for me, like animation has tended, as much as I've longed for it not to pull me towards a tightness. And I really wanted something else in the practice, and we all know it's possible. I sometimes struggle with that. So the ink really opened me up because it was like, it's liquid, it's flexible. So this is a shot from a film that I'm finishing up right now, like a 7-minute piece that's very related actually to what I'm talking about in here, but in the sense of an experimental animation related. And it took me a minute when I first started animating this way to actually like get used to the way it looked. There are things in it that I now kind of actually really like and become like the point of it for me, but like that little jump in the palm, that's not intentional, but it is sort of what comes out of the process. And for me, I definitely have to practice just like accepting what is and not being a perfectionist. And it's funny because I can love things like that in other people's work, but until this year when I started animating this way, I wasn't very trained in that for my own kind of view of myself. And now's a good time to mention anything you see in here that like looks like a drawing, I drew it probably. And it's my hope that like this isn't just some kind of wellness activity, even though that's super important. I always think we should be doing things to feel well, but I'm hoping it kind of like is in the lines too, and like kind of in the concept of what it is I'm working with and drawing. And I do think ink and brush are particularly good at that because they're so sensitive that they can kind of like record a history of the mark in a particularly special way. So this is like my setup basically, but before I even dig into specifics, the first thing I'll say is that I'm animating in as modular a way as I can kind of conceive of, at least for now. So I do mostly animate standing, and I do animate mostly on this kind of like pad for my feet, but I have all kinds of tools, like you can kind of see this riser on the desk to raise the drawing up or down. It's not fancy, it's not hydraulic, but I basically am trying not to stiffen into any one position. And for the record, like every now and then I pull out a stool and animate here too. Like the goal is to kind of be shifting regularly to stay kind of physically engaged in the practice. I do think about this stuff a lot in my digital setup as well. So I want to just say again, like I'm going to show you a lot of like paper stuff, but I don't think that this is like a way of approaching the work that's unavailable to digital practice of any kind. It is, I think, sometimes more challenging, especially with like screen fatigue and some of the other parts of my life requiring so much of me online. I just find there to be a certain pleasure in cultivating areas to not be on the screen. But the one thing I will say, and again, not a doctor, but I think this is a good idea. I've kind of stopped using the dual monitor thing. I, for years, was like, how many screens can I get and how many things can I hide away on my little screens? But I'm starting to think it actually like rotates my neck in a weird way. So I don't know. And then yeah, I love my kneeling chair. Those are my digital things. It's not all about production though. Like that's the other thing. Like I think a lot of 2020 and 2021, I was honestly like, how can I divest my consciousness from capitalism to some extent, to just put it bluntly? And it's pretty much impossible, but I do feel like I'm working on being a less like productive human. And even as I say that, there's like a part of me that's like, oh, does that sound bad? But I think that there's so much of what I'm trying to experience and like share it in the work and my life or whatever that is like not about just like making stuff, sharing it, and like feeling cool or something. So as a result of that, like rest is super important to this practice. And I'm not perfect at this. Like even like 2 weeks ago, I really was struggling to just like stop and chill out and not be in the studio because I am that type of person. But I also want to just say like rest can mean a bunch of different things. It can also mean, just getting enough sleep, which is a huge priority for me. And I really advocate for that. But also like this kind of like active state of contemplation is a different kind of rest that I at least have a tendency, I always call it murdering my drawings, like to keep pushing through. And when something doesn't look right, to kind of dig back in because I'm like mad at myself about it. And I swear I'm learning this. This is something that like I've made some real improvements with this year. Like stepping away, letting your brain do its own thing is a great way to resolve that issue most of the time, at least for me. And it's also really important to me that like this doesn't sound like I'm just cultivating some way of being blissed out in the studio. Like stuff is real. Like your body experiences all kinds of things. Pain and discomfort is real. I subscribe to this kind of notion that's in Creota Wilberg's Draw Stronger, which is a book that for years I've used in my classes. It's great. If anyone wants to email me, I have some PDFs, but it's also a great book to buy and support Creota Wilberg. She basically says in the book, like when you have physical discomfort, it's trying to tell you something. Something's not right. And it could be, in any aspect of the body, mind or physical. But it's a signal, and to stop kind of fighting that and letting it in. And, I haven't said this explicitly yet. I almost feel like I don't need to. Animator injury is so ubiquitous that we obviously have a lot to talk about here when it comes to pain and discomfort. But I'm also just like openly and hopefully unabashedly trying to have fun with this stuff now. I mean, I think when I asked myself that question where I was like, what would I need to do to make this fun again? It led me down this process and the way I'm animating now. And it actually kind of surprises me that I went like a few years there. Of course, like some of those years were, a lot was going on globally. but I went a few years without actually having much fun animating. And that's fair for anyone to experience, but I just want to prioritize that more and see what comes of it, because it is important to me. And then I promise this wouldn't be a talk about like, rules for being healthy, but I do want to say like hydration is super important. But more than that, like I try and practice this thing that's like before I even go to the studio, like looking out for my body some in that, because I think I would often maybe care about my body at the end of the workday when it was in pain. But what I try and do is like set myself up for success along the way. So you'll always see me with like a giant bottle of water and a giant thing of tea. That's actually my small thermos, but I have the big one right here tonight. And that's just my way of like, first of all, I just like it, but taking care of the body that needs hydration to perform. I mean, it really does. And it's so easy for me to like kind of get lost in it. So that's a bee sting. That's not an elbow injury from animation. But for me, tennis elbow is like the thing that if I don't think about it every single day that I'm animating, it starts to kind of flare up. And I do a bunch of stuff to deal with it. It's really not that bad. I mostly have my like physical repetitive use injury figured out. But one thing that I started to kind of uncover, this is through Tai Chi, was the way that I was using my elbow a little more than I needed to. And this is another thing where I'm like, I know this is possible in the digital realm, but I know that the tablet was actually like encouraging this a little. So in Tai Chi, you almost never raise your elbow over your wrist. There's often like a sinking of the elbows. And the reason for that is because, elbows are great. They let us reach real far, but there's a lot more kind of strength and power and consistency and longevity in sort of like the core of our bodies. And it's good to not like confuse the elbow with what, your like central part of your body is supposed to do. So I do practice like sinking my elbows. And here's another little poem. So with this kind of concept, I just want to say like, in addition to some of these things that are good to just check in, like, am I doing this? Am I doing that for myself? I'm also advocating that we kind of thank parts of our bodies or kind of appreciate what bodies do. And again, I know bodies do very different things too. So I never want to presume that what I'm talking about is, what anyone else is physically embodying. But I've noticed this, and I think there's plenty of research to back me up on this. Let's say at the end of the workday, the tennis elbow is activated and kind of like going. There's an actual difference, at least in what I perceive of pain levels, when I am mad at the pain and feel frustrated and feel like my animation career is fraught with this problem of like physicality, versus if I actually like, and maybe this is a bit woo-woo for some, but if I actually am like, thank you, arm, thank you, that's awesome, like how cool. If I do that for like a minute or two, I can experience like a difference in the pain. And this comes out of the Bessel van der Kolk book as well. I've also been working to appreciate like the natural hand of what I draw, and in the sense like hand, I mean almost in the way we use style. But one thing that I notice about myself is that, well, so I have what's called a benign tremor. Not a big deal for me personally. My hand has always got just like the tiniest shake to it. And I feel like I came up in a time of like extreme vector animation and like smoothness and just like perfect lines. And I think this will actually like shift with the whole like AI conversation looming. But I've always kind of corrected my lines a lot while drawing. And it just started to occur to me, like, what was actually in that? Like, what was I doing? And I'm not talking about like drawing well or not, whatever I or anyone prescribes for themselves, but like smoothing out my lines. So I stopped doing that. And I don't know, there's a part of me that like, I see this squiggly line on the left and I'm like a little bit critical of it. But then there's another part of me that's trying, or at least like feels as though that's what I do. And that's kind of like this natural rhythm. I mean, in speaking towards AI or something, it's like, I have a body, so I might as well do things with it that the body does. But I do feel like this is it's been a little bit confused for me with using a stylus a lot. I mean, it's so incredible how much we can control in a stylus as far as like flow, or how loose or hard our tools can be digitally speaking. I'm trying now to actually set the flow, if I say this the right way, so that it's real juicy, so that I can like pull back some of the physical tension. Because it's totally possible. There's almost this like utopian aspect of the pen, but I've been choking up on it a lot for years, and I don't think that was helping any of the like kind of repetitive use injuries either. Brush is a great tool for that. I mean, even if you don't want to animate with a brush, it is like kind of a practice technique that can like, I think, ground us in our hands and what they are actually doing. Incredibly unforgiving. So it is that kind of practice of appreciating it too. And here's like a warm-up exercise that I like to do before animating. I literally just breathe and draw lines. And I am looking at what I'm drawing. This isn't just like coloring book like fun. It's kind of just a tool to ground in the actual image and the hand. But I think I maybe wasn't breathing enough before while I was drawing. It's possible. I don't know. I don't think I'm the worst at it, but I do know of a few students of mine I've had that have mentioned they hold their breath while they draw. And to me, that seems like something worth addressing. So I practice drawing lines while breathing. Mine are usually wobbly and wavy, but they could be straighter, just connecting breath to the line. And these are from different days, and it's just so interesting to me how different to me they look. So there's something in that too, like our hand is ever shifting. And, speaking of shifting, animators deal in movement. That's what we do and create, at least in our work. But for so long, I felt like there's this like split there where like I have historically sat at a desk, almost stiffening, tightening, using such a little part of my body while I animated. Like, where's the movement in that? And so my fantasy for this practice was essentially like relaxed shoulders. And then, I don't know, this is like it's not scientific, but like this like column of like energy that could kind of be available. It's nice to just see an image of a spine sometimes, because we have kind of interesting, unique spines in the animal world. Even our closest relative, the chimpanzee, has a relatively straight spine. And what does this mean for us? To me, it's like almost a coil or a spiral. There's a sense of like, a thing that has a lot of flexibility in our spines, but obviously it's quite fragile too. So this is why I started standing while I animate, basically. And I never thought I'd be like a standing person. I have all kinds of like foot issues. I have flat feet, and it just wasn't really something that like I was gonna do up until I realized I could do it for like shorter periods of time and move around a little more. I don't know if that's useful for anyone to hear. That's kind of just like what I've uncovered. That pad underneath is crucial, and adds like a lot of bounce and flexibility to what I'm doing. But I also try and incorporate other levels in the drawing practice for the first time ever. So instead of just being at a desk, I now have like the standing thing. And then what I do is when I'm done, or as I create frames, and I'm animating really quickly, I mean, relative to what I've done in the past, I lay them out on the ground. Some people like a wall. I like it on the ground to have the frames there. And it invites me to kind of like squat down into the work. And it's just like one way I can like bring more motion into the practice. And you can see some of the frames from the GIF on the right are in the frames on the left. But I think there's also this like kind of conceptual approach to contact in the feet and the work we do as animators. I started this talk asking you to feel your feet. And it's because I found that it's been missing from this practice for so long, even when I'm sitting in a chair. It's been so much about the like kind of upper body, the hands and the face. And I just think about like the walk cycle and the classic contact pose being the crucial part of that. To me, like in animation, one of the most interesting moments is always the moment of contact, of touch between any two bodies. But the moment of figure to floor is also this kind of like bigger thing, because it's like really this like portal into the stuff that's outside of a figure. Like we're all in gravity, and the ground is kind of like this line that's connecting it all. And I don't know if that's actually that useful in the moment to moment of drawing, but like feeling the feet and the whole body, to me, I've experienced some really different kind of versions of drawing that arose from that. I think it's been a really positive thing in my life. And, you know, eye strain, such a scary thing. I feel like I'm seeing in different communities that use screens a lot, animators included. So please take care of your eyes. Remember 20 by 20 by 20, 20 feet away every 20 minutes for 20 seconds. That's the thing. But I'm also really passionate about bringing like pleasure and sight back into my animation practice. So these are other activities that I think actually like boost kind of like a somatic animation, just looking at cool stuff, which maybe is like easy to do, but and you can decide how rigorous you want to make it. There's a useful element to it when you're trying to draw something. Just looking at it is always good, but actually just like appreciating this thing of seeing and vision and the way that like kind of light and shadow interplay. You know, inattentional blindness is a real thing. It's when you don't see something because you don't name it, or you don't like have enough kind of awareness to really notice that something is happening. I always say, I'm from North Carolina. When I first started animating, I would go home and I could suddenly see deer on the side of the road in the dark in a way that were never quite available to me. And I think that came out of training myself to see an entire frame all at once and look for the discrepancies in motion. And so I've experienced, you know, growing some kind of attention. What I'm working on this year is also growing kind of just an awareness of like, I don't know, I guess I would call it some kind of physics or something, but just like the environment beyond the body. And this is my bulletin board. It's also behind me right now. And there's this sign on it that says, how high are the chances that more is not more? And I am the worst at this. Like I've mentioned it a couple times now. I'm definitely an additive type person. And I've murdered so many drawings and like shots this year, if not just over my whole lifetime. But enough is enough. I want to get better at seeing when it's done. And I think some of this is actually like, as I've explored it this year, about paying attention to the drawing as it's happening. Because what I notice is like, I can get really hung up on, and I'm saying drawing, but I could frames. I can get really hung up on like what I want to be happening and how it's going to be, but that doesn't necessarily happen. And then I feel like I'm often faced with this question, like, am I going to go with what's working and maybe isn't my like, you know, super special idea? Or am I going to cling to that idea and kind of crush all the magic in this very like spontaneous thing that's happened, which is a drawing? And I've kind of decided I'm working on this, and I think I have actually improved quite a bit. It's why my work is getting more like minimal, I guess. But I also think there's something in here of rest and restoration, and like sometimes less really is more. And especially in our field where it's so easy to overextend, the more I felt like I could bring this to the practice, the better off I would be in a lifetime perspective. And I don't want to sacrifice the quality of the work. I really don't. I care so much about that. But I want to be here for the work. Like I want to have a lifetime of being in dialogue with this stuff. And that's, I'm realizing, going to require just a really different outlook overall. I do kind of, as we approach an end here, want to talk about feelings, because I've been talking a lot about the physicality. And for me, you know, the feelings are there. They're real. They're part of the body in a big way. And so, especially as like a maker and somebody who, I think many of us do this, goes out and then like shows this stuff, there's like this whole like ego kind of experience in making work, for better or worse. I don't know that it's like, you know, anything to be ashamed of. It's just what we do. You know, we share, and go through things as a result of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about my cycle this year with this kind of practice emotionally. And this is a cycle, so it's going to start over, and it applies to a lot of different like sort of ego deaths I've experienced in my lifetime. So, you know, I started out with this instinct. What if I could like make animation fun and easy for myself? It didn't always feel that way, and there's a lot of work behind the scenes that's not coming through in this talk that is like the actual practice of getting there. And a lot of that was really frustrating to me because I'm not, you know, some perfect equanimous person all the time. So I huff and I puff. And then like, you know, sometimes I fall apart, or I like, you know, forget what I'm even doing and kind of lose it a little. But what I usually notice is some point in the process, the word like flow probably speaks to it, but I find that I'm like back at it with a little bit of flexibility. But the real thing I'm looking for, and this is like the sweet spot, and it doesn't happen all the time, is when I'm bold and flexible. So I'm looking for that kind of interplay between when it's like enough me, and you know, if this means anything to you, you can just say, you know, imagine it's you in that space. It's enough of like what I'm doing, my unconscious human self, but also like reacting to everything around me, still kind of moving and flexible. And then it just starts over again. You know, that's kind of how it goes. But change is also a big thing that happens in any kind of practice or framework. I would feel remiss if I was not mentioning that, like, sometimes if animation's not fun, it's because, you know, maybe it's not the thing anymore, or whatever it is that we're talking about. Like, I do think we change and we grow. And I don't know exactly what the future is of me in like teaching, but it was really liberating to realize that I didn't have to stay on the path I had really carved out for myself for a really long time. And I just want to say that, like, that sometimes a deep inquiry or something like, can I enjoy this work more, leads to something totally different. And I really think that's part of life. Like, some of the best things in my life have come out of like taking the leap and realizing I've changed. So I'm going to wrap up now, and then I want to hear from all of you if you want. And in this final section, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. So we've been talking a lot about the body. I'll start here though. You're going to die, and I'm going to die. And, you know, mortality is part of what we're dealing with here. Time is not infinite. There's this kind of Buddhist saying that Pema Chodron says very well, but I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. It's, if the only thing that is certain is death, but the time of death is uncertain, what do you do? And I didn't mention it at the beginning, but that exact phrase really motivated a lot of the changes I've made in the past few years. Not feeling afraid, but, or, you know, at times feeling afraid of other things, but like in a good way, like embracing this cool, weird thing of being alive and trying my best to make it, you know, count for something, whatever that means to you. I've started to figure out what it means to me. Part of the conundrum to me has always been that like the human body is this kind of sack. I used to have a phrase, the skin is the largest sack, that was like kind of an animation joke about flour sacks, but it's also to say that like we're just this like big bag that can get punctured and kind of pulled away. And all of our senses are in the body, so we don't really like get to plug into each other and know what's what. Like, I don't know what anyone here is going through and what they need, and that's just kind of like the fundamental condition here. I do know that some form of like exploration of motion is part of a deep human legacy that animation is certainly a part of. And it serves some kind of human role for all of us, because it's existed for, you know, thousands and thousands of years. It's really hard in an era of digital technology and all the other kind of stressors that we're living through to locate the body. You know, there's also a long legacy in our, I'm going to say like Western centric culture, although I don't know where everyone's zooming in from, to divide the mind and the body and to value one and not the other. So that is a real challenge. I personally spend a lot of time thinking about climate change and the ways that it's an unprecedented moment on planet Earth and the ways that humanity is intertwined with that. And so all this is very like stressful, but I do feel like there's a value in working on like somatic experience from the perspective of what it does for the world too. I'm not trying to congratulate myself and say, hey, I've been saving the world all year. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I do think there's something beyond just the like sort of self-oriented aspect of what it seems like going into the studio is all about. And I guess I don't know that I'm anywhere further on this journey, but I am trying to avoid doing unconscious things with my body that harms others, stomping on someone or being, I think as a human, I feel personally like there's some choice in how we kind of interact with environment and life beyond this individual form. And there's a lot of things that I do or that I want to see more clearly that are extractive. And I'm trying to be more aware of even these little subtle moments of what my body feels or is doing, with just the hope of being a good human, whatever that means. It may in the end not mean much. Now, I really, really don't like to think about like good people, bad people. That's not my style here. And again, we never know what anyone else is experiencing, what their privileges, resources, advantages are. But I feel like there's this fantasy I have that there is this kind of permeable membrane of the body, and where there is more understanding and depth and kind of communication that can happen from that awareness. For me, it relates not just to other people, but kind of connecting to what I'm a part of in, my molecules, or just standing on the ground, and how that kind of like, makes me feel like, okay, I really am here in this place. And like, honestly, this place, planet Earth, is like pretty amazing a lot of the time. And there's so much to like be in awe of, so much complexity and wonder. And, exercises like just training yourself to see beauty are kind of cool ways that I found to enter that. And I feel like at the end of the day, like that's what I got. I'm doing my best in so many other ways, but I do know that there's something really fundamental about caring for like the physical and the body, even within the form of animation, that to me connects to the things that are really important, at least to me. All right, so that's the talk part of the talk. And from here, I'm gonna stop my screen share. And I'm just going to invite you all, if you would like, no pressure, to share anything you want to share at this point. So here are some things you can share. You can share reactions or reflections on the talk. You can also share what your experiences are in terms of somatic experience with animation, either the ways it's been cut off from you or the ways you're working on it. And we can also talk about tips and tricks and things that you all feel are useful in this practice. Okay, I see a hand, and it looks like it's from Dro.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hello there.
Hi.
I love this so much. I wanted to ask, especially having gone through this whole process of learning a new way to relate to your body with regards to art making and animation. If you were to go back to the academic university setting, how would your approach to teaching these things change? Like, what would be your new pedagogy? Like, how would that work?
Oh yeah, it would be very intermeshed for me. And there's a lot that I feel like, I will say, I think in the past like 5-10 years, I've seen a lot of the people in my life who teach in higher ed really work on including more kind of somatic materials in classes, more stretches, more like tools for things like that. For me, I would definitely be like, you know, sharing this in much the way I did here, like kind of presenting it alongside of many other aspects of the practice. I do like these individual lessons too, and that like breath line thing is like a big one for me. I find it very useful. But then I would also, I mean, it always gets tricky, but like the main thing I want to see from higher ed is like some changes even beyond the professorial level, like on the institutional and structural level, to, you know, change curriculums or change resources for students that are really designed to empower, you know, them within their bodies too. So I guess I would like advocate for those things assertively if I was given the chance. I see I've got some stuff in the chat. I'm going to read, I hope it's okay, Matthias's comment. Everything you say makes a lot of sense to me as an autistic person. Animation is a form of stimming. It is very difficult for me to identify my emotional states. Drawing and animation are a form of self-regulation and help me to understand what my body feels and experiences. Cool. I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much. Yeah, it makes sense to me that you would say that. I definitely experience some similar things while I draw. I think I've often really, like if I look at my like lifetime of this kind of practice, the things that first drew me to it, like I'm talking in high school or like at a younger age, were very related to what you shared. And yeah, it's very useful for that. So thank you for sharing. Okay. Does anyone else want to share anything? Any comments, queries, questions?
I just want to say this has been so helpful as I think about resetting up my working space. I've been like reorganizing it and trying to find something that just fits right. And I haven't been taking into account how the body moves and like needs to move while animating. And I think it's something that honestly leads to a lot of injuries because people try and sit in these like rigid ways or rigid, repetitive motions, and just like everything you said resonated so much, even like the holding your breath. Oh, thank you for calling that out because that's something I know I am very guilty of.
I'm curious if anyone has kind of other thoughts or insights on that. I mean, again, because I'm sharing all this, but I still am like, do I know what I'm talking about? But I think I do. At least I think I know what my body needs, which is to move more. And yeah, I had the same experience where like I've continually for years been like, what kind of desk is right for me, or what kind of height for the computer is right for me. And I'm really, yeah, the movement of it has become the thing for sure. I know that when I used to go to physical therapy for an animation related injury, at one point they were like, my doctor was like, "You're taking breaks, right?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm taking breaks like every hour or so." And they were like, "You need to be moving your muscles into a different position every 20 minutes." And I remember just that really surprising me at the time. It's been years, so I'm used to that concept now. And I think there's some of that in what I'm describing and, you know, advocating for. I see a hand from Stella and I see a comment from Neo. Let's go to Stella first, and then Neo, I'm gonna grab your comment too.
Hi. Oh gosh, what is happening? Sorry. Oh my God. Okay, there we go. Thanks for doing this talk. I really appreciate it. I recently just started like changing my drawing surface, going from sitting to like standing and putting it on top of a crate just this week or last week, and it's been kind of life-changing. And I've encountered also that like the best thing for my body is to kind of not be animating. And I mean, it's really hard to reconcile that with like what I want to do. And I come into contact with like a lot of things I don't believe I should be doing, like, you know, this like kind of fetishization of labor is like in direct conflict with anti-capitalist values, and I was wondering like how you deal with that. If you seem,
Yeah,
I saw a thumbs up, so
I'm glad you asked that, and I'm definitely also down to like tie in other thoughts and insights here. I will say it's a deeply imperfect journey, because I think I mentioned like, you know, anti-capitalist practice was like an over, like on the mind map of what I was like going for in my life, at least like in that way that at the start of the pandemic, I, like many, was like, okay, what am I gonna like change as a result of this? But it doesn't feel explicitly possible, because I feel like I'm in capitalism. I'm not able to kind of conceive of myself without it. But but I do feel hopeful the more I reclaim choice in that practice. Like, and again, this is a hard thing to talk through in a group setting, because like I think everybody has these like different set of circumstances that lead to all kinds of risks and risk analysis. But I guess I've started to realize I do have some choices along the way, and that I sometimes hear this kind of self-talk in my head that's like, well, I could never not say yes to that thing because I need either the money or the resources it's going to bring along the way. And I'm really not perfect at it, but I think I've been better the last year or two at saying no to a lot of things. And every time I like settle into that, like especially like a week or two after saying a big no, there's this like bliss that comes from it, and it's been cool to notice that. But like I said, I don't know that there's like a perfect answer there, because I think it just sucks. Like I think it sucks, and it sucks hard in animation too. Like I didn't mean to laugh, but because I feel so deeply what you said about like it's a struggle, because you're thinking animation's not good for your body, and I'm guessing that's like sort of one of the big parts of your life. And the one thing I want to say about that, and like again, hard to say what's possible, what economy we're all walking into or whatever, but like pricing differently, I think is a valid response to that. I'm still in this kind of conjectural period. I left the teaching gig about a year ago, and I'm kind of back at freelancing, and it's actually working out okay. I mean, my lifestyle is not like one that leads to riches, but it's working. But I have been pricing in a way that basically reflects what my body is capable of, more than what I think has been kind of implied as an expectation in a production economy. And sometimes that's hard to do too, to send that email and be like, is that the right number for what I'm, you know? And but it like actually is. And maybe we can all better support each other on that too, because I think that's the kind of thing that, you know, more awareness around is useful. Because like it's true. I mean, I full stop do not think, and you know, tell me if anyone thinks this is wrong, I do not think 40 hours a week is possible as an animator. Like for like, and maybe, you know, we're working 60 hours a week, whatever. Like that's, I can't conceive of a reality where that's actually a possibility anymore for me. So I have to figure out how to charge people the amount that makes that possible. Maybe we should talk in like another year, see how it's going. Okay, we have so many hands.
thank you, Miranda.
I just want to quickly mention Neo's comment, and then looks like Jonah and Carissa want to say something. Okay, I've been working with 3D software or any computer animation stuffs for so long. I may need to start thinking about how the possibility of animation could be. Thanks for the inspiring talk. Cool. Okay, well, I'm glad that it did anything for you, even in the 3D space. Of course, I know, I mean, I've done a little CG work, but not enough to really know. But I have a feeling, you know, somatic experience, which is a whole field, by the way, of, you know, therapeutic practice. If anyone's looking for the words to guide them beyond the realm of what I shared today, those would be your terms, your search words. And I think there is a lot of possibilities still in any, you know, discipline. Okay, let's see it. Let's go to Carissa and then Jonah.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, hi. Okay. I kind of ramble, so I don't want to ramble. But I wanted to, I have a question, but also wanted to share a little bit about myself that I think is relevant. So I'm a sex worker and I went to film school and I tried to get by freelancing for a while, but it didn't really work. So I just, went into sex work and like, I haven't really worked on an animation since I like pushed my body so hard. I want to say a year and a half ago, to the point where like, I don't know, and I was doing things that was related to sex work, like stimulants, all this stuff, not good for my body at all. And anyway, I got to the point where I couldn't get out of bed, like physically couldn't turn my neck. It was terrible. And, stop motion's like involved, like there's a lot of bending, anyway. And I honestly haven't, I love animation, like with all my heart, but like, that was, if I like fucked up my body so bad that I just stopped after that, full stopped. And I don't know, right now I'm studying to become like a woodworker. I got into this like employment training program and I kind of just said, goodbye to film as a job, as a career, but I still want to make art on my own. And I guess my question for you is like, do you have exercises where you center yourself prior to both body, mind, like I might have missed this because I came in a little late. Prior to animating, because I think my hardest thing is like, I'm in such survival mode all the time and I'm trying to shift out of that. I've been trying to shift out of that, but like, I can't even get to the level of play that animation kind of requires. Like, because I just never get there. And I just wonder if you have ways of getting there that I don't know. I know it's like a big question, but
yeah. No, it is a big question, and I'll do my best to answer it with the small caveat, of course, that like, that's I'll share what I do at least, and because that's what you asked, so I'll do it. But of course, there's a lot that probably is different that will not apply, but I do think that having some grounding activities is useful before going into the studio. I do things. I for sure do. I mean, my Tai Chi practice is basically this. So I've been doing, you might have missed this part, I've been doing Tai Chi for getting close to 4 years, and it's kind of become that thing for me. And what I like about it is it's moving and it's kind of active and meditative at the same time. And that's all really useful. But the thing that you said that really like stood out to me is just the preservation of survival mode is like almost, I'm not an authority on this, but like to me, I'm like, well, let's talk about that first, or like, maybe not here, but in general, like it would make sense that if one is really struggling to survive, that animation is probably not gonna like come really easily. And I think
right.
One thing I've truly struggled with this, and I think a lot of people have, is like every couple of years I make a film and I decide like, oh, I'm an animator again, and I really am an animator. And then it like goes away, and it can be really sad and scary, because even compared to like other art forms, like I don't want to compare it so much, but like I've had lives where drawing is more my thing. There's a sustainability to drawing that I feel is a little missing in this format. And I don't know what to do about that, but like I'm hearing you talk about your past few years, and without knowing everything, like my first thought is like, well, that makes sense. Like, like, and I don't know the future for you or for anyone. And like, what will it come back? I mean, it sounds like woodworking is kind of filling some kind of space there, or maybe that's also like just a practical skill to have to, earn money. But, I guess the question, maybe I'll just ask the question I asked myself when I started asking how I could make myself like animating again, which is like asking oneself what their needs are in that space, and like really expanding beyond just like, the anatomical stuff. Like, what would, and this is, I guess, mostly rhetorical, but you're going to email me later, by the way. What would you need to make it fun and for the animation to actually be the restorative thing? because I always feel this like great heartbreak thinking, I mentioned a minute or two ago, like, I don't know, when I was in high school, like art was my refuge, you know, and it really like grounded me from parts of my life that were not so simple. And it changed a lot when art became more my identity and my job and like all these things. And it's messy, you know. And I guess one of the things I didn't mention, but I'm really trying to cultivate some of that same energy in the studio now. And for whatever reason, like using a brush has like brought that back in a little. But I don't know, is it possible, or is it something that's migrating? But I will say, like, just I my wish for you is just like, you know, more pleasure and restoration in that practice, regardless of what kind of thing it is, or, you know, what capital letter it means about your life.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Jonah?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Miranda. Yeah, this was really great. Thank you so much for sharing this, and for everyone for sharing. But yeah, I just wanted to start by saying that, yeah, I just think this is like so essential. It was like really just nice to hear you work through this whole process. And I feel like within my own circle of animators, there's a lot of people that have like really been experiencing a lot of what you were describing, maybe especially because of the last few years, but it's just like really nice to hear you articulate it well and like almost have a bit of a program of like, try these things and this is how you got to this point. Because yeah, it's so easy to get so kind of just like tensed up and screwed up like as an animator. Like that just seems to me to be like the default position. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, it feels like so hard to begin to like loosen that process up. So it's cool to hear like the ways that you did that. And so yeah, I really feel like this is foundational, and like I hope you keep teaching, because like this seems like really important for like new young animators. But what I wanted to ask though, and this is maybe like shifting back towards the mind and away from the body a little bit, but is like, I know that you're a reader and you do a lot of research, and you talked in the last part about like how that has filtered into the new work. But I guess I'm just curious, yeah, I feel like there is oftentimes pressure on artists, filmmakers to like make work that's like impactful, meaningful, like, you know, filtering the current thing or whatever. And that like puts a lot of pressure on people. But like, I really love that you're approaching first, like, how do I make this enjoyable for myself? But I guess I'm curious, like, do you find that like the reading and research and all that other stuff, like, do you think that it will filter its way into the work no matter what? Like, as long as you're just like approaching it in like the way that you are now, as opposed to like consciously being like, I need to like make this meaningful or something. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so I am a reader. I guess I am a reader. Yeah. I feel like it's still a little unclear to me. Like, you know, Jonah's actually mostly finished the film I'm working on right now. I don't know if it like has like research in it other than the research of the physical embodied thing. So I think it may show up differently in the work, but like going back to even this idea of like the studios where I go to chill out, I feel as though in a less complex era, which maybe all eras are complex, but I truly think we're living through kind of an unprecedented newish version of existence on this planet. Maybe I would have like the space and time to go into the studio and like, for me, finally craft these like kind of theoretical weavings. And I think I've done that sometimes in my work, but I seem to not have that to give anymore. And I'm not too sad about it. I think one thing that's really surprising to me is like, in the sense of like the studio is the place I go to chill out and have fun. What often happens, I've had the same notebook type for years. I have like 30 of these on a shelf right next to me. I'm always like writing notes in this book while I'm animating. And some of those are probably really heady and not even necessarily things I necessarily want to share. But like that stuff is happening. It's in there. It's like almost like unlocking relaxation, sinking the elbow. Suddenly, like I actually feel much more creative. I don't know if I'm ever gonna like write an essay again. I might, I really might, but it's not like how I'm conceiving of things. But I think using less tension and practicing it is creating heady conceptual thoughts too. We'll see if they are worth sharing. Did that answer anything? Do you have any thoughts?
No, yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think what I maybe should have said at the end is like, yeah, like is that kind of starting point even like maybe important anymore once you get to this point? And it seems to me that like it maybe isn't, and I think that that's also maybe very healthy. So it sounds great. But yeah, thank you again. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all important and it's all valid. So I think this is the starting point now, I guess, and we'll see how it evolves in the future.
For sure.
Let's see, Carissa, did you want to share something again? Or is your hand just still up?
No, I'm sorry. Let me take that down. My bad.
Oh, okay. Okay, did I miss anybody? It looks like Maud Kasperzak shared a collection of writing. Thank you so much for sharing something like that. Feel free, anyone else who has any thoughts or resources to share, to add them to the chat as well. I'm gonna copy that so I can save it. Okay, anything else? All right, McKenna, what do you think?
Wow, I'm like still processing everything. This has been like so wonderful. Like, thank you so much. I think this has touched me very deeply. Like, even in the conversation when you were saying, what do you need for animation to be the restorative thing? I had to write that down because I think so often in these conversations and these events, when we come to the Q&A, many of us have these things we want to animate, but it's how do we find the space to do that in a way that like brings us fulfillment. And I think you've given us some incredible tools tonight to do that and have this be something that like sustains us rather than contributing to like further or initial burnout. So thank you, because like I know I'm going to be practicing a bunch of these and I'm so excited for this to be a resource for people new or like experienced in animation, because it's such an important conversation. So truly thank you so much for coming to like share your beautiful work with us and your process and practice.
Oh, thank you so much. Like I said, I'm a big fan. So my pleasure.
Anytime, like please come back. I can't wait to see your film and your work like out in the world. For those like watching, I put Miranda's website and Instagram in the chat and I'll pop that in again, but please reach out to her on Instagram or website, or like I know she's also teaches classes, like incredible resources on there, like check them out. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you so much, Miranda. Unless there's any final words or last thoughts, like yeah.
Thanks,
All right.
y'all.
Thank you.
See y'all later. Bye.